All right. Welcome to your State Tribal Education Partnerships Guidance for Prospective Applicants for the fiscal year 23 grant competition. This is our second pre-application webinar. While we are covering the exact same slides that were covered in the first pre-application webinar, there may be some questions and things that are slightly different, and the recording is available for both webinars on the OIE website, which we will give you the link to momentarily. All of you who are online participants today will be muted throughout the session to allow us to be able to get through all of the content that we need to, and to be able to get to your questions as quickly as possible from the chat. So we do still want your questions, but we ask that you do place those in the chat box. You should be able to find the chat typically at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little talk bubble, which will open up the chat panel where you can place your questions throughout today's webinar. We have certain spots already plotted out throughout the webinar today where we will take those questions. So just know that while we may not answer them immediately upon you placing them in the chat, we will get to them. If we happen to not have time to answer any questions, we will post those after. The recording of this webinar will be posted again on the OIE website and will be up by the beginning of next week. If you happen to have any technical issues today, you're welcome to place that in the chat and one of our team members can help you, whether you're having maybe some audio issues or problems seeing the webinar today. If for some reason you get disconnected, please email us at oie@seiservices.com so that we can help get you reconnected. With us today, we have Dr. Donna Sabas-Burns, the OIE Discretionary Group Leader, and Donna Bussell, your STEP Competition Manager. So like I mentioned before, we do have a lot of information that we're going to be going through today. We're going to start with the grant competition overview, discussing the purpose, eligible entities, and funding available for the STEP grant competition. We'll review the absolute and competitive preference priorities, the selection criteria, application instructions, how to submit your application, and a review of the resources available to help you with this. Our goal is that by the end of this webinar, you know what's in this fiscal year 2023 grant application package, what the application requirements are, why a logic model is needed to strengthen your project narrative, what the selection criteria are, the types of forms that are required, the common components of applying for federal grants and using those federal application systems, and to give you the opportunities to submit questions to OIE and get answers to those questions. As we get started today, though, we would like to get to know you a little bit better and know who's joining us today. So we do have a quick poll. I'm going to pop that up on your screen. You should see that pop right up in the middle of your screen for you to answer. If you're joining us from a mobile device, you may need to scroll over. Sometimes it's hidden and you have to scroll over to get to it. If for some reason you're not able to locate the poll, you're welcome to answer the question over in the chat. We're asking, are you here today representing a tribe, a tribal educational agency, a tribal organization, or another type of entity? And if you mark other, if you could share with us in the chat, what type of entity are you representing today? I'll give you just a moment to go ahead and respond. And I appreciate you, some of you sharing over in the chat those other entities that you're here representing today. We've got about 80% of you responded, so I am going to go ahead and close the poll and share with you those results. it looks like we're pretty evenly split between those representing tribal educational agencies and other, that big basket of other types of organizations. And then a good representation as well from tribal organizations and tribes. So we appreciate you sharing that with us. I'm going to take that down off of your screen. And just a few really important notes as we get started today. We are going to cover a lot of information about the STEP grant competition, but it will not address all competition requirements or present all available information. In order for you to have the full details of this grant competition, it's very important that you read the notice inviting applications and the application package. Remember that you need to follow all instructions on grants.gov and processes such as SAM. It's also important for you to follow the common instructions for applicants to Department of Education discretionary grant programs, which were published in the Federal Register on December 7th, 2022, and available at the link on the slide. Don't worry about trying to copy down that very long link. After the webinar, it will be available in the slide deck, which is already up on the OIU website. Note that, you may have applied for a federal grant before. You may be fairly well versed in the common instructions, but these are updated instructions from December 7th, 2022. These supersede the version that was published on December 27th, 2021. Also, we have transitioned from DUNS to UEIs. So unique entity IDs replaced DUNS numbers on April 4th, 2022. So if you currently have a DUNS number that is registered in sam.gov, you have a corresponding UEI assigned, and you'll need to use that UEI to upload your application. If you do not have a UEI, you're going to need to get one before you can apply for this grant opportunity. For more information, including how to get a new UEI, you can refer to the UEI transition fact sheet, which is linked here. Now, as we head into our grant competition overview, I'll turn it over to Dawn.
Great. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon while we talk to you about this really great opportunity with our STEP program, State Tribal Education Partnerships 2023. Giving you a little bit of background for those of you who are not familiar with it, it was authorized under Section 6132 of the ESEA Act of 1965. One of the many efforts across the federal government to I skipped a slide, didn't I? Sorry. The purposes are to promote tribal self-determination in education and improve the academic achievement of Indian children and youth, and then to promote the coordination and collaboration of tribal educational agencies, referred to as TEAs, as defined in this particular notice, with state educational agencies, SEAs, and LEAs, local educational agencies, to meet the unique educational and cultural related academic needs of Indian students. Now for the background. Under 6132 of ESEA Act, one of the many efforts across federal government to strengthen the government-to-government relationships with tribal nations across the United States. And this program was also created as a key priority of the department to strengthen community engagement and with the hopes of advancing systemic change. The intent for this particular competition is to create new TEAs and to increase collaboration among the 3 TEAs, SEAs, and LEAs, and to build capacity of TEAs to directly administer these education programs, including formula grant programs, consistent with state law and under a written agreement among the parties. And for an example, applicants could propose subjects or projects rather that include a partnership among a TEA, SEA, and LEA aimed at improving the identification of Native students who may not be eligible for an ESEA Title VI education grant, formula grant. A TEA must submit a DWA, we love acronyms, as you know, as defined in the NEA, which we will get to. And if you would like even a more in-depth, you can go directly to that NIA, like it was mentioned, the notice inviting applications to get all the definitions for this that you can, at your heart's desire. A draft written agreement with one of the SEAs, one or more LEAs, or both. You can have a both SEA and an LEA with its application for funding for this particular program. And the purposes of the draft written agreement, a school funded by the Bureau of Education, BIE, of Indian Education is considered to be an LEA. The agreement must document the commitment of the parties to work together and must include all required elements, including in the definition of the draft written agreement. And please note that letters of support from an LEA or SEA alone will not meet this requirement and will not be accepted. So please, while you may still provide letters of support, if you like, you don't, that will not count for this requirement. In accordance with the ESEA section 6132C2, all grantees who are expanding early TEAs must train and support the SEA and LEAs in areas related to tribal history, language, and culture. And looking at the step overview of eligible applicants, we have Indian tribes, tribal educational agencies, a consortium of TEAs, tribal organization approved by an Indian tribe. And please note that that Indian tribe that receives funds from the BIE under Section 1140 of the Education Amendments of 1978 is not eligible to receive funds under this program. So just be sure to double check that if you're a tribe under that category. We have an estimated $2.4 million for this grant program. And the length depends on which absolute priority you write to. The first priority will be up to 36 months. And if you're writing to absolute priority 2, you can have up to 60 months for the program. We're looking at the range of awards per year is between 300 and 500,000. So an estimated 400,000-ish. And we're looking to fund about 5 to 8 depending on total presented costs for budgets and depending on, how much, if it's a 36 or 60 month. Application deadline is July 3rd, 2023 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, Washington, D.C. time. Very, very important. And you may see that kind of riddled throughout this presentation. Just as a reminder, we want to make sure everybody understands that time deadline is true. You may submit a notice of intent to apply. Today is the deadline for that. It is not required, but it's encouraged. It gives us an idea of the number of applications potentially coming in. You would email that. If you have time today, you can email that to the program officer, Donna Bussell, at her email right there. And please put in the subject line, intent to apply, and include the organizational or entity's name, address, the contact person's name, and contact person's email address. And I see Sarah put that email right into the chat box, so you can copy that and paste it. Again, if you don't get to do this, it does not mean you cannot apply. Please understand, you absolutely may do so if you're not able to get that notice of intention to apply in today. As an applicant, you must clearly identify the specific absolute priority and the competitive preference priorities in the proposed project abstract. And with this competition, as I mentioned, there are 2 absolute priorities and a total of 3 competitive preference priorities. So let's take a look at the absolute priorities. The department intends to create 2 separate funding slates. one for applicants that meet absolute priority 1, and another for applicants that meet absolute priority 2. As a result, the department may fund applications out of the overall rank order, provided applications of sufficient quality are submitted, but the department is not bound to do so. Each applicant must clearly identify, again, in the project abstract, which absolute priority you are seeking and are writing to. An applicant must be an Indian tribe or tribal organization approved by an Indian tribe that is applying to create a TEA. In absolute priority 2, the applicant must be an early TEA, and we will get to those definitions of what that means, an early TEA. Next slide, please. So speaking of, what is an early TEA? An early TEA is a TEA that meets 1 or 2 of the criteria in the definition of the established TEA. And the established TEA means that you've received a STEP grant in 2012 or subsequent years, or provides evidence of an existing prior relationship with an SEA or LEA. It has an existing tribal education code, has directly administered at least 1 education program within the last 5 years, has administered at least 1 federal, state, local, or private grant within the past 5 years, or has authorized teaching certifications. Again, it must meet 1 or 2 of the criteria to be considered an early TEA. And then what is a new TEA? Is simply a tribal entity that does not meet the definition of early TEA or established TEA. And the competitive preference priorities, you have a whole bunch to choose from. You can see the number, and we'll go through each one of these. For CPP 1 is up to 5 points. It's either 0 or 5 points you can get. CPP 2, 3 points. CPP 3, 2 points. And CPP 1 and 2 and 3 for a maximum of 10 points. So it really does pay to try to meet some of these competitive preference priorities to get a little edge up on your score. And looking ahead at what those mean. Competitive preference priority 1 must propose to partner with an LEA for 2 things. First is to develop and maintain effective and culturally responsive methods to better identify and support the identification of Indian students who may be undercounted or under-identified as eligible for a Title VI formula grant program. And this includes identifying Indian students who are not enrolled in a tribal nation, but who have an affiliation with the tribal nation through being a descendant in the 1st or 2nd degree from a tribal nation member as described in ESEA section 6151.3. And just a side note here, for the FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, it does not permit an LEA to disclose personal identified information, or PII, from students' education records to a TEA without parental consent, unless the disclosure meets one of the FERPA's exceptions to the general consent requirement. The most relevant exceptions to FERPA's general consent requirement they may apply if certain conditions are met are the school official studies and audit evaluation exceptions. And this is all something that we just want to put on record as far as those wondering how that works with school system in the FERPA. And when you see the slide deck, there's a link to, we can put in there that you can look for more information on FERPA if you need more. Competitive preference priority 2, you can get up to 3 points. I keep saying up to, but it's not. Either you get it or you don't. So you can get 3 points for CPP 2. And it's an applicant, you must be that early TEA or applying to create a TEA. And you must not have previously received a STEP award from the department. CPP3 is looking at strengthening cross-agency coordination and community engagement to advance systemic change, which is 2 points. And these are projects are designed to take systemic evidence-based approach to improving outcomes for underserved students in one or more of the following priority areas. And there is a whole bunch of different efforts coordinated with federal, state, and local agencies or community-based organization that support students. And it goes from energy to homelessness, all the way through technology, public safety, adult education and literacy, college readiness. So you can see the litany of choices looking to advance systemic change. I won't go over if there's even a whole bunch of them. You can take a look at them just to save some time if you need to look at the slide deck again. In addressing CPP3, an applicant must ensure that the proposed activities function solely to promote cross-agency coordination and that it is consistent with the STEP statutes and they do not provide direct services to students. So please remember, these are not direct services. They're not allowed with this particular grant program. And with performance measures, I'm going to turn it over to Donna J. Bussell.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're going to go over our performance measures, and you can find this in Part 6, Award Administration Information, number 5 in the NIA. So the department's indicators of success for the STEP program are the Government Performance Results Act, or the GEPRA measures. Whenever you are, couple of tips there, whenever you are writing your proposed project, carefully consider these measures that we're about to go over in thinking about how to approach and evaluate your project. Also, if you are awarded a grant, you will be required to provide data about your progress in meeting these measures in your annual performance report and your final report. So let's look at these STEP GEPRA measures. Absolute priority 1, you will have to report on GEPRA measure A on the right-hand side, the new TEA. That is the number of tribes that create a TEA by the end of the grant period. So if you're writing towards absolute priority 1, this is your GEPRA measure that you will have to meet. For absolute priority 2, you will have to meet GEPRA measure B, C, and D. B is the number of capacity building activities offered by the TEA for the SEA or LEA, such as trainings, technical assistance in areas related to tribal history, language, or culture. C is the capacity building by the SEA or LEA. This is the number of capacity building activities offered by the SEA or the LEA for the TEA. Trainings, technical assistance, developing TEA capacity to administer and coordinate education programs are a few examples. And D, education programs. And this is the number of education programs directly administered by the grantees. Our STEP project measures. The project measures are the objectives that each applicant writes and includes in their application specific to their project goals. Each objective is required to be reported on each and every year of the grant. Typically, project objectives are reported as ratios, and you are going to think through how to write your project objectives to be reported on annually. So there's an example here. When you're writing your project objectives, include something like each year or by the end of the grant period. Now we are going to take a look at any questions or comments in the chat box. We may not be able to answer everything, and remember to always refer back to that NIA.
So your first question is, in the NIA, under competitive preference priority 3, Also listed are 2, conducting community needs and asset mapping, 3, establishing cross-agency partnerships, 4, identifying, documenting, and disseminating policies, and 5, expanding or improving parent-family engagement. So I think they're asking for clarification on if those are still included under competitive preference priority 3.
I don't even see that question. Where is that?
They sent it as a direct message.
Can you go back to that slide of competitive preference priority 3?
Absolutely. And this may be one that we need to double check and circle back to
Yes.
a little bit later at our next question section. So
Yeah.
our next question is under absolute priority 2. Let me go back to that slide for reference. Do we need DWAs with both SEAs?
I think you're on CPP slide. And Donna, do you know,
Oh, so
with the
sorry.
absolute party 2, do we need
What-
draft written agreements with both SEAs?
I believe let me look at the NIA. I think we have to have a draft written agreement with any applicant. It should be with all partners.
Right.
All right, so yes, you will need a DWA with all applicable partners. Next question is, are the REAAs in Alaska considered to be LEAs?
I'm going to refer you back to the definitions. We're looking at eligible entities in the NIA and take a look at that. Can you tell us what REAAs are?
I'll give her just a second to respond in the chat.
As you can tell, we're
The
always very
rule-
hesitant with some of the eligibility and eligibility
Yeah.
questions because of we don't want to steer you wrong.
Rural education agencies, Alaska agencies is the REAAs.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so you will need to refer back to the eligible entities for this grant competition. While OIE is able to provide you with that list of eligible entities, it is up to you to determine if you are one of those eligible entities.
Correct.
Our next question being, are there any particulars we should consider if we have a consortium of tribes who fit both the definition of early TEA and established TEA, but where an early TEA would be the lead institution implying?
You can also submit 2 separate applications in addressing each one. So you can have, submit one application addressing one AP and then another one with the other 2. If that's one way, maybe. Does that help?
And I'll let them respond in the chat as far as whether that would be, if that clarifies for them. And then final question for this Q&A section. For an early TEA, would hiring staff be considered expanding capacity under absolute priority 2? And absolute priority 2 is early TEA piece. So they're referring here as far as whether hiring staff would be considered that expanding capacity.
I would suggest going back, just taking a look at, does hiring staff fit under that definition? Capacity is defined, yes. But we'll see if we can get you some more information on that in just a few minutes.
All right. Continue to pop questions into the chat. We are going to hop back into the presentation section and then come back to more questions in a bit.
Okay. We went through performance measures. We were on slide 30. There we go. So we're going to look at application requirements, and this may help answer a few of your questions that you have. For FY 2023 and any subsequent year in which we make awards from the list of unfunded applications from this competition, applicants must meet the following application requirements, which are from section 6132D of the ESSA 20 USC 7452 and from the NFP. The link, we can attach that link in the chat. Next slide, there we go. Application requirements. For each application for funds must include the following. So all applicants must have these in their application. The draft written agreement with partners. An applicant must provide a draft written agreement with the appropriate SEA and or LEA partners. For applicants creating a new TEA, a draft written agreement is only required with an LEA. I think that answers some of those questions that we had. For applicants expanding capacity for an early TEA, a draft written agreement with both an SEA and LEA is required. Number two, a statement describing the activities to be conducted and the objectives to be achieved under the grant. Number three, a description of the method to be used for evaluating the effectiveness of the activities for which assistance is sought and for determining whether such objectives are achieved. Here are more application requirements. For tribal education agencies, TEA applicants, evidence of existing capacity as a TEA. Number five, evidence that the eligible applicant has consulted with other education entities, if any, within the territorial jurisdiction of the applicant that will be affected by the activities to be conducted under the grant. Number six, a description of how the eligible applicant will consult with such other education entities in the operation and evaluation of the activities conducted under the grant. Number seven, evidence that there will be adequate resources provided under this program or from other sources to complete the activities for which assistance is sought. Let's look at the draft written agreement a little closer. A DWA is an unsigned written agreement with an attached letter of support from each SEA or LEA partner, indicating each has reviewed the project plan and will finalize the DWA into an FWA or final written agreement within 120 days of grant award notification, or your GAN. The DWA must include the following: the roles and responsibilities for each partner, an agreed upon list of deliverables. There's a note, deliverables cannot be direct services to Indian students. Number three, identification of at least one point of contact for each partner. Number four, a description of the resources each partner will contribute to the project. Another note, resources do not need to be monetary or matching funds. Another program requirement for all applicants: you must hire project director within 60 days. So grantees must hire a project director as soon as practicable, but no later than 60 days after the beginning of the performance period. Another program requirement for all applicants, as we stated earlier, the final written agreement with the partners. So a final written agreement in FDWA means a signed written agreement between the TEA and the SEA or LEA, the TEA and one or more LEAs, or the TEA and both an SEA and one or more LEAs. That documents the commitment and timeline of the agreeing partners to implement the terms and conditions specified in the draft written agreement. Grantees must submit a final written agreement signed by all parties entering into the agreement within 120 days after receiving the grant award notification, or the GAN. Here's more program requirements for all. This is the ISDEAA statutory hiring preference. Awards that are primarily for the benefit of Indians are subject to the provisions of Section 7B of the ISDEAA. That section requires that to the greatest extent feasible, a grantee give to Indian preference and opportunities for training and employment in connection with the administration of the grant, and give to Indian organizations and to Indian-owned economic enterprises as defined in Section 3 of the Indian Financing Act of 1974. Preference in the award of contracts in connection with the administration of the grant. For purposes of this preference, an Indian is a member of any federally recognized tribe. For a program requirement, if you are writing towards absolute priority 1, is to plan and develop a TEA. And the program requirements for absolute priority 2 are as follows. And the requirements come from SS 6132. The specific references are in the NIA. Number 1, directly administer as defined education programs, including formula grant programs under the ESSA, consistent with state law and under an agreement between the parties. Number 2 is to build capacity to administer and coordinate such education programs and to improve the relationship and coordinate between the TEA and the SEAs and LEAs that educate students from the tribe. Look at 4 more program requirements for absolute priority 2. Receive training and support from the SEA and LEAs in areas such as data collection and analysis, grants management and monitoring, fiscal accountability, and other areas as needed. Number 4, train and support the SEAs and LEAs in areas related to tribal history, language, and culture. Number 5, build on existing activities or resources rather than replacing other funds. Number 6, carry out other activities consistent with the purposes of the program. We will look at some of those important definitions that we were referring to in the next slide. And again, understand that all the definitions listed apply to this competition only, and you can find them in the NIA. Directly administer as applied in this competition is conducting as the fiscal agent, SEA functions or LEA functions for the education programs, including ESEA, formula grant programs, consistent with state law, and the FWA. Again, the FWA is the final written agreement, a signed written agreement between all the parties, such as the TEA and the SEA or LEA, the TEA and one or more LEAs, or the TEA and both an SEA and one or more LEAs. And that documents the committed and timeline of the agreeing partners to implement the terms and conditions as specified in that draft written agreement. A few more important definitions. A Indian tribe is a federally recognized tribe or state recognized tribe. As the next one is relevant outcome, the student outcomes or other outcomes. The key project component is designed to improve consistent with the specific goals of the program. And a few more definitions. It's a tribal consultation. That's the SEA or LEA provides tribes the opportunity for input. The SEA or LEA considers and responds to the input from tribal leaders or their officially designated proxies regarding an education program that affects the tribal nation or TEA. And the partner tribal nation provides written confirmation that the consultation was meaningful and in good faith. We have two more definitions. So the Tribal Education Agency, the TEA, the agency, department, or instrumentality of an Indian tribe that is primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education. This term also includes an agency, department, or instrumentality of more than one tribe if the tribes are in close geographic proximity or have cultural connections to each other and agree through joint tribal government resolutions to have a combined TEA. Our last definition is underserved student. This is a student which may include children in early learning environments, students in K through 12 programs, students in post-secondary education or career and technical education, and adult learners as appropriate. In one or more of the following subgroups, you see there a student who is living in poverty, a member of a federally recognized tribe, disconnected youth, technological unconnected youth, a student experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, or student performing significantly below grade level. And I will turn the selection criteria over to Dr. Donna Sabes-Burton.
Righty. Now we're going to shift our focus to the selection criteria and the relationship between the criteria, absolute priority, and its elements in the application. Remember, fully respond to each of these selection criterion. So even if there's several different pieces, you want to make sure when you're writing to these that you're writing to each and every one. Don't skip. Do not lump any of your written responses for all the sub-criteria into just one response. Keep your written responses for each of them separately so the peer reviewer can easily identify your answer. And do not skip, like I said, do not pick and choose which one you want to write them out. Do all of them fully and separately. And also just to reiterate that these webinar offerings aim to just give a picture of what you need to know and are not 100% comprehensive. For a complete picture, as Donna has alluded to earlier, please read both the NIA and that application package. It's full of instructions and how to submit, and answer a lot of the questions, because we here are just reiterating this is kind of an overview, and to always go back for those minute details is to your advantage. So please make sure you can do that when you're responding to this in your application. Alrighty. First one, selection criteria. We're looking at the quality of the project design. And this has a bulk of the points right here for 30 points. And it's looking, of course, at the quality of the proposed project and taking a look at how that's presented with the goals and objectives and outcomes. Are they specific and measurable? The extent to which these proposed project is designed to build capacity and yield results that will extend beyond the period of federal assistance, and the extent to which the proposed project will integrate with or build on similar related efforts to improve some of the relevant outcomes using existing funding streams. And that's up to 10 points. So that's a total of 30 points. This next one is the quality of project services for a total of 20 points. And the secretary is looking specifically at wanting you to consider the quality and sufficiency of strategies for ensuring equal access and treatment for eligible project participants who are members of groups that have traditionally been underrepresented based on race, color, national origin, gender, age, or disability. and the extent to which the services to be provided in the proposed project involve the collaboration of appropriate partners for maximizing the effectiveness of meeting the project services. C of resources is another selection criteria, and they want to make sure that the adequacy of support, looking at facilities, equipment, supplies, and other resources from the applicant organization or lead applicant organization, 5 points. The extent to which the budget is adequate to support the proposed project, so make sure that your description of need matches the costs and budget that you have listed. There's potential for continued support of the project for sustainability after federal funding ends as appropriate, and the demonstrated commitment of appropriate entities to such support. Next is the quality of the management plan for 20 points, and making sure that the quality of this plan is clear with clear time commitments. Are they appropriate time commitments of the project director and the principal investigator and any other key project personnel, appropriate and adequate to meet the objectives that they propose? And then the last selection criteria piece is the quality of the project personnel. So they want to take a look at which the applicant encourages applications for employment from persons who are members of groups that have traditionally been underrepresented, and the qualifications, including relevant training and experience of the project director or principal investigator. And you can include resumes in the other attachment sections of the application to help demonstrate this as well. Okay, questions?
All right, so our first question was a clarification on one of the earlier questions. And basically they are trying to determine if they are applying as a consortium, does everyone have to meet the criteria to be considered under the absolute priority? Or as long as the lead applicant meets that absolute priority criteria, they can apply under that one. And I'll go back to the absolute priority slide. So they're asking if, as a consortium, if the lead applicant is an early TEA, but some of the other consortium partners are not early TEAs, can they still apply under priority 2? Or under absolute priority 1, if one of the applicants, say, is an early TEA, and other applicants, so would be creating a new TEA, can they still do it under absolute priority 1 if one of those is also an early TEA instead of being a brand new one?
Is that the question from Alex?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the first thoughts that came back, one consortium cannot meet both AP1 and AP2, of course, in the same application, and a combination of one early TEA and 2 to 3 tribes working on a new TEA could only apply for AP2 if the early TEA will be the lead applicant. If a tribe without a TEA wants to be the lead applicant for a second application, the consortium could apply under AP1 in a separate application. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, and I'll let Alex respond in the chat if he would like further clarification. All right. Our next question, someone was asking for links to previously awarded recipients and projects. On the OIE website, where you probably found this information to join this webinar, you'll also find a list of previous STEP grantees. One note is that each STEP grant competition is designed slightly differently. So their projects may or may not meet all the requirements and priorities of this particular iteration of the STEP grant competition. But there is that listing of previously awarded grantees on the OIE website. All right, and then our next question. So there was the follow-up as far as for the early TEA, would hiring staff be considered expanding capacity? And just to clarify that Donna did answer in the chat that there's a program requirement to build capacity to administer and coordinate such education programs and to improve the relationship and coordination between the TEA and the SEA and LEA that educate students from the tribe. So hiring staff may be building capacity if they doing the activities listed above. And then I do see that there was a question about coming off mute to ask a question aloud. Unfortunately, in this webinar, we aren't set up to take verbal questions, but you are welcome to place that in the chat, or you can also submit it via email to the competition manager, and I can put her email address back in the chat as well. And then final question for this Q&A section before we move on is, will this recording and slides be made available after today? Yes. The recording and slides from the first pre-application webinar, which covered this same content, is already available on the OIE website. And the recording from this session will be made available on the OIE website as soon as it's processed by start of next week. All right, let's hop back in. Remember, you can continue placing your questions in the chat and we will take those in the next section.
Great. And this next section is all about the application instructions. So you have your notice inviting applications and all the definitions and eligibility information. Now we're going to switch to looking at, when you go into grants.gov, what that application package consists of. So when you're looking through the instruction package, that's going to be your guide to all of the other required components of that Donna just talked about with some of those application requirements. And you will go to find this application in www.grants.gov. There's this wonderful search tool. And if you were just to put STEP or Indian education, it'll pull it up. But if you want to be specific, you can also use what they call the grant opportunity number, and that's highlighted right there on the slide to search by. But I guarantee you, you can get there many different ways if you don't have that handy. So here's again an abbreviated presentation from that application package, and it does not substitute for reading it in its entirety. And when you pull up that grants.gov, you just have that little red circle. That's what it'll look like. Yeah, sorry. And looking at some of the department specific application guidance. So within both the FY 2023 STEP NIA and the application instruction package, you will find reference to what is called common instructions for applicants, which Sarah alluded to at the very beginning. To the Department of Education discretionary grant programs. And this was published in the Federal Register, as she said, back in December. And so there's a lot of different links from prior instructions, but please, please, please make sure you are accessing the most current, because that will make a difference in how you respond to some of the application components. And then taking a look at some of these application the checklist, that we have a checklist in there. And it's recommended that your application, your electronic application, be organized in this following manner and to include the following parts in order to expedite the review process for the peer reviewers, as well as for us when we screen for initial eligibility. Instructions for all parts and forms of the application are found either on the following pages of the application package or individually for each form in the grants.gov web. Make sure you review this application, electronic application, to make sure you have completed all the forms and sections. And remember, when applying electronically through grants.gov, you will need to ensure that you are using your UEI number as it's registered in the System for Award Management, or SAM. And so looking at the first one, part one, I can't say that word, preliminary documents, you have the application for federal assistance in the SF 424 form. Your ed supplemental information for that SF 424 form is part of that part 1. And make sure you answer each section and each block that it's asking. Part 2 is the overall budget information, and that's also known as Ed Form 524. And part 3 is the Ed abstract form, which is also very, very important part of this process. Number 4, the project narrative, of course, is the bulk that will be addressing that selection criteria that we just reviewed. The budget narrative, not only are you that Ed 524 form, which shows your initial budget, it also is, you provide a budget narrative that matches what you're asking for. And oftentimes we can have applicants who provide a narrative that has one number and then it's in their Ed 524 form is a completely different number. So you want to make sure those all match up. And then, as mentioned earlier, also the other attachments, which is part 6, where you can do that DWA. If you are looking to recoup some indirect cost rates, that you can do your current agreement in this area, bibliography, your signed consortium agreement, if that's applicable, resumes, and so forth, all in part 6. And then in part 7, you have your assurances and your certifications. And that's the lobbying activities, which is actually optional, the lobbying form for certification regarding lobbying, and then, of course, your GEPA. And GEPA is a little bit different for those of you who may not have been submitted an application since last year. They do have a different section of GEPA, which we'll hit on a little bit further in this presentation. So looking at the SF42 form application form, it's standard and has the instructions where you can, for item 9, be sure that the applicant type, you can just do that drop-down menu and self-identify. But there are all different types of questions as part of this application. And please, again, make sure that you answer all of them. And the Ed supplemental information, the SF42 form, is also a standard form, and that includes corresponding instructions right in that application package when you open it up. The budget form, that 524, section B for non-federal funds are optional. And here's, remember, a very good note to remember. You must provide all requested budget information for each of either the 3 or the 5 years of the project, depending on which absolute priority you are applying under, and the total column in order to be considered for federal funding. It's one time we had one person do 1 year, with which they misunderstood to be, because since it was the same across all years, they just listed the one, and that was a big problem to fix. So make sure that you're filling out that form in each year that you're requesting funding for. And then no more than 5% of the funds awarded for a grant may be used for administrative costs. It's tempting to go back and want to make last minute line item category adjustments, especially to the budget when you're trying to price things out again, but you make sure that your narrative under part 5 is consistent with the final amounts in your budget chart, and that the grant application that scores within funding range, because some of these unexplained discrepancies could mean points. It could mean if it's not clear to the peer reviewer or the information is just not matching, there's some points that could be costs. So just make sure that your budget and narrative are working congruently with each other. Then part 5 of the budget narrative attachment serves as section C of that Ed Form 524. Make sure to complete an itemized budget breakdown and narrative for each year of the project of up to 36 or 60 months. And that can be for travel, for example, what is the how many people, the costs of conference, the airline tickets, anything like that, you want to give any kind of itemized breakdown as you can. Review and edit to ensure that all the total funding listed each year in your budget narrative, it matches again on that 524 part 2. Identify the nature and the amount of the proposed expenditure and provide sufficient detail so the readers truly understand what the purpose is that you are writing to, that have your budget provides, and you want to make sure that that's clearly written and it makes sense according to the selection criteria that you're writing to. It's important to remember the supplement, not supplant requirement. And this program involves that supplement. I don't know what's my problem today. Supplement, not supplant funding requirements. Under section 6132 of the ESEA, funds under this section must be used to supplement and not supplant other federal, state, and local programs that meet the needs of tribal students. It's important to understand that these requirements and the best practices, such as the difference between the two, between supplanting and supplementing, and what costs are allowable. And to supplant is to replace something with something else, while supplementing is to enhance something by adding to it. And there are rules governing this distinction. One's allowable and the other is not. So funds may not be used to supplant any existing federal, state, or local funds. And you can go into, there's a link that can be provided into these guidelines. The abstract, very, very important piece of your application. It should not exceed 2 double-spaced pages and should identify the applicant, including all its consortium members, if applicable, and should concisely describe the following: your project title, state the title of the proposed project; the institution, state the official name of the applicant's tribe, institution, or entity; the eligibility, state the eligibility category for the applicant needs; identify any SEA and or LEA partners; indicate which of the absolute priorities and if any of the competitive preference priorities your project is addressing; a brief description of the proposed project goals and objectives. And note that grants.gov, you may get a note that says they can only, an abstract cannot exceed 1 page. However, an abstract of more than 1 page may be uploaded. But please make sure that you include all of those components in your abstract. Part 4 of the project narrative attachment. Please try to keep your narrative to 30 pages and use the following standards of the 8.5 by 11. You can see and go through these. I won't go all over some of these with the font and making sure you've got the point per pitch and so forth. But the readers appreciate that. It makes it more succinct and easy to find and identify and score you those points instead of them having to kind of hunt around a 100-page document. And then the last part with second to last part, part 6, the other attachments, again, the draft written agreements, resumes, indirect costs, bibliographies. If you have letters of support, signed consortium agreements, what they may be, can be here. And then again, making sure with those assurances and certifications that you're providing that information. And as I said, with GEPA, there is a different approach to GEPA. It used to be 1 question, and now it's quite different. So I'm going to turn that over to Donna Bussell to go over.
Thank you. And I will suggest you visit the website that you see there at the bottom, oesc.ed.gov/GEPA/ to really go more in depth in GEPA. So we're going to start reviewing GEPA section 427 law. we're just going to touch on some of these. The GEPA section 427 titled Equity for Students, Teachers, and Other Program Beneficiaries was enacted as a part of the Improving America's School Act of 1994. Its purpose is to ensure equitable access to participation in federally assisted programs for all beneficiaries. The 6 barriers that you see highlighted are, but not limited to, equitable access and participation include gender, race, national origin, color, disability, and age. Applicants must determine and define at the outset, and based on the design of their proposed grant project, the participants and community the project proposes to serve in local circumstances, what barriers may inhibit the full and effective participation of all who might benefit from the program. These are GEPA section 427 standard form changes. As you can see in the original form, there were 4, and the updated format is quite different. So go through, look at each of those. For each applicant still maintains flexibility in determining and defining barriers, but the questions prompt responses to be focused on equity and specific questions, in addition to a timeline to meet targeted milestones for removing the identified barriers. The next slide, we'll see an updated GEPA form that has the questions. Applicants must respond to each question on the standard form and submit the form with its grant application package. Here is a sample error message. So this will pop up if you have not answered that, the GEPA section 427 questions. So make sure those are answered or you will have an incomplete application. Here are some examples. So a grant program goal to provide grants to alternative high schools, nonprofit organizations, and combinations of those institutions to provide academics and other support services to prepare low-income first-generation college students and other underrepresented students for college education. The Education Department's strong interest in ensuring low-income students, first-generation college students, students who are English learners, students with disabilities, homeless students, students who are in foster care, and other disconnected students receive the necessary support to assist them in successfully pursuing a college education. These are both examples of, and the several slides that follow provide an example response to each question on the new Section 427 form from fictitious organizations applying for federal funds. Please go over these so you can kind of have a template of how you would answer those questions, but in response to your own organization. And I am not going to go over each question. So we'll go to slide 77. Here are the GEPA form instructions. They start on slide 77. And on slide 78 are more GEPA form instructions. And on slide 79, we have some resources for GEPA section 427. Let's go over these application requirements and where in the application to address them. I think somebody had a question earlier about where these were found. They're in section 1, those application requirements, and they're tucked right in between the priorities, and then right after are the definitions. So you'll find the application requirements and then the program requirements right after that, right before you get to definitions. So they are in the NIA. Your draft written agreement, you can attach that as a separate attachment. The statement that describes the activities to be conducted, you can include a summary in the application abstract. You also may address this under project evaluation under subcriterion 2, quality of management plan subcriterion 1, or quality of the project design subcriterion 1. TEA applicants, evidence of existing capacity as a TEA. Applicants may address these under quality of management plan subcriterion 3. or quality of project design subcriterion 2. The next part, the description or method for evaluation and effectiveness of activities and objectives. You can address those, and applicants can address these in quality of project design subcriterion 1. Evidence that the eligible applicant has consulted with other educational entities, you can address that in the narrative. And our the last two application requirements are the description how the eligible applicant will consult each other about the operation of activities. Address those under quality of project design subcriterion 3 and quality of project services subcriterion 2. Lastly, evidence that there will be adequate resources. Address those under quality of project services subcriterion 1 and the quality of management plan subcriterion 1 as well. The eligibility screening and peer review panel. Dr. Sabas Burns was talking about making sure, everything is written like what we had suggested earlier. These applications will be screened for eligibility. Notice of ineligibility will be sent by email. All eligible applicants will be reviewed by a peer review panel. Independently read, they're going to be independently read and scored by 3 peer reviewers, and then they will be on a panel discussion. All peer-reviewed applications that receive points will be rank ordered by OIE based on average final scores from the peer reviewers. There will be 2 slates again, one for absolute priority 1 and another slate for absolute priority 2. And we can go to the next slide.
And sure, I'll take this for this next section. Again, July 3rd, 2023 at 11:59 seconds p.m. Eastern time, grants.gov will not let you, it will shut down, or even if you, let me state that a different way. If you are a minute late, it is considered late. So please, there's also now's a very, very busy grant time, and there's bottlenecks at grants.gov. So it really is helpful to you to submit it as early as possible. And next slide. The next couple slides, we're going to be talking about a wonderful resource that has come new to us with our STEP grants, and it's called the Circles of Reflection. Many of you have probably already heard of this, and I'm going to hand it over to Amy Bitterman and Mandy Smoker-Broadus, who can tell you more about this.
Great. Thanks so much, Donna and Donna. So the Circles of Reflection is something that we at the National Comprehensive Center, that Mandy and I and a whole group of experts in Native education developed a few years ago now. And we had received some funding through the National Comprehensive Center to develop resources to help build the capacity to improve collaboration between tribes. Oh, thanks, Jackie. Jackie knows all about it. Jackie White. Increased collaboration between tribes, districts, and SEAs. And Oklahoma is one of the states actually that has implemented Circles of Reflection. And we're really excited to talk to you today about a special version of Circles of Reflection that we have created for use by you all for your grant application for the STEP grant. And I'm going to turn it over to Mandy, and she's going to talk a little more about the details and what's involved.
Thanks, Amy. So Circles of Reflection has been designed by Native education leaders and advocates around the country to really bring states, tribes, and districts that serve Indigenous students to the table to have really important discussions and to build out better planning opportunities for the future. And so the original version, as Amy said, has been we've reformatted it, retooled it with the focus on the STEP grant priorities, specifically for tribes. And we really see it as a great tool that tribes can use in the beginning stages of their applications or later on even to do that deeper dive and to determine priorities that might exist and to really get a good lay of the land as far as what might be best to focus on in the STEP grants. The process itself takes about 2 to 3 hours to complete for each of these gatherings. So the first circle is one gathering, the second circle is a third gathering, and then the third circle is also another 2 to 3 hour meeting. There's a comprehensive set of materials on how to implement the full process, and we'll probably put that in the chat for you, but we also have it on the last slide here today. So in that first circle, the tribe pulls together a team, hopefully, so that it's not just one tribal education person doing this on their own, but hopefully there are others there in the tribe or in the community that can help out. And so that initial meeting, that initial gathering, is just a discussion of current activities that may or may not relate to the grant and its requirements. In the second circle is when the tribe invites in local districts that will be partners to come to the table. And this might also include the state if you're falling into that second priority area. And you really talk about everything that was discussed in that first circle, and all get on the same page and talk about, again, those possibilities that might exist. The third circle, everyone comes back together one more time and really uses some of the tools we've developed that match up to the STEP grant priorities to, again, sort of determine what, as a collective group of the tribe, districts, and possibly the state, what might be the best path forward. And so we just hope that some folks might find this tool useful to you, and hopefully create those really engaging opportunities for discussion and collaboration. Amy?
And I think, yep, on here we just have a list of the materials that we've developed, and I popped the link in the chat for you all to check them out yourselves. But we have an overview, which just really kind of describes the key components and kind of walks through each circle so you know kind of what to expect and who's involved. We have a facilitation guide, which is much more detailed and really gives you kind of step-by-step instructions as you walk through the process. And we have some templates to create agendas and checklists, kind of things you want to make sure that you think about and plan for and have in place in order to conduct the circles. These are all like very modifiable though. So it's just kind of recommended suggestions that you should take and use and develop as you see fit that would best meet your needs. And then we have a couple worksheets to use kind of during the circles themselves to kind of have those guiding questions in there to be able to respond to. And those are also templates that are modifiable. And we have a resource bank too. I'll put the link as well for that, which is just resources that the Native Education Collaborative with the National Comprehensive Center has developed, but also kind of a repository for evidence-based tools, promising programs that we've kind of pulled together to have sort of in this repository. So we really hope you check it out and think it could be a useful kind of facilitation framework as you're going to be developing these applications and bringing these groups together. Anyway, it's kind of a model to use to make that happen. And we are going to be putting out a training pretty soon as well that will be posted on our website that will hopefully help you all who are thinking about maybe engaging in this. And we have the QR code if that's an easier way for you to scan it and get to the website. So thank you.
Thank you both so much. And I really appreciate the time that it took we've never had an OIE of such a specialized resource. And so tailoring this to the STEP program is just a perfect fit. And so we really hope that that is an optional resource that you can take a look, and not just for OIE grants, but any of your communications and partnerships across all that you do. So thank you guys so much, Amy and Mandy, for that. And as we're getting towards the end of our session, we do have some tips and resources and reminders. Please make sure that you read that NIA in its entirety and the application and instructions, both before, during, and even after, to make sure you didn't miss anything. Get your registration in SAM in grants.gov if you have never applied. It can be time consuming, so please make sure that you do that as soon as possible. Again, make it easy for the reviewer to find and to understand all of your information. Donna was kind and gave you those charts of where to put things, so they can help with that. Proofread, proofread, proofread. You really want to make sure that it's professional in its presentation and easy to follow. And of course, there's a place to submit your application to grants.gov. And SAM's, get in there early, and there's sam.gov, user guides, demonstration videos, and everything you could possibly want to know. Guidance on SAM registration is available at that link. Grants.gov is also a great resource. Their site is just phenomenal. They have all kinds of tools and resources for applicants to look at, to help. If you should have any submission problems, please do not email your program officer, Donna Bussell, because she cannot help you. Go to grants.gov, and there's a slide with all of their information that they could help you hopefully figure out the problems that you may be having. And then we are concluded. This is our last pre-app webinar. And as Sarah said, our first one's already been posted to the STEP website, which the link is there. And this one will be also, and you can also get the slide deck online as well. I'm going to turn it over to Donna for the last few slides.
This is our website. Go to our website for any information we have, and you'll go to Office of Indian Education, and then click at the bottom. There's a State Tribal Education Program portion, and you can find how to apply. The NIA, the Notice of Inviting Applications, was published May 2nd, 2023. The application package is live and ready to go in grants.gov. Again, there's the funding opportunity number, which will make it easier to find this exact grant. And again, sam.gov, we're going to mention that over and over because it's really important that you make sure that you are registered in sam.gov and have a UEI update. So more resources after this. You may access requirements from 2 CFR Part 200, known as Uniform Guidance, and there are links right there. Those are the direct links. Also, we gave you some links for resources for a logic model, if you would like to use the logic model for planning, collaborating, and monitoring. Next, we have our tutorials and webinar recordings links. There are recordings for applicants on how to apply in grants.gov. And we are also going to have both of our pre-application webinars are going to be available on our website. Here's our contact information and the link to the NIA. Also, you may follow us on Twitter at OIE Indian Ed for any other information coming out.
And that does take us to our final question block. And you only have one question remaining. So the last question that is in the chat box was in reference to where the program requirements and project measures are located. And I know you commented, Donna, in the chat that that can actually be found in the notice inviting applications. If you pull that notice inviting applications down from the OIE website, it actually pulls you a 7-page document excerpt from the Federal Register, and it's on the 3rd page of that document. And you'll see it there about midway down the page. So it is in that notice inviting applications. If you are looking for the recordings of these webinars, the PDF of these slides with the links that have been shared throughout, that is all available on the OIE website. That link is also in the chat where it says direct link to step how to apply. That is the link to where you can find those recordings, the NIA, the slide decks, everything you need to get you started on your application. And I do see we have one other question and we have one more minute until we end. So if our tribe has a SAM and our TEA is under the tribe, do we use their SAM?
Whoever is the main applicant is the one who has to have the SAM. Let me just put it that way.
Well, and that is our final question, and that is our final moments here with you today. We appreciate you joining this STEP pre-application webinar. As mentioned before, this recording will be up on the website next week, but the previous pre-application webinar recording is already there, and this slide deck is already there for your review. Thank you for joining and have a lovely rest of your day.